The movement is also extremely important because it helps to deter the perpetrators from doing it again. The 9/11 Truth Movement says to them loud and clear, we are watching, and if you try it again, we're going to catch you red-handed. I am going to continue to be involved in 9/11 Truth because 9/11 lies got us where we are, and I believe that only 9/11 Truth can reverse it. My organization, the Patriots, has 3 immediate goals. Number 1, to prevent an attack on Iran. It would make enemies of Russia and China and would cement our position as the #1 rogue nation on earth. Number 2 is to end the disastrous occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. And number 3, partly because it may be the only way to do the first 2, is to impeach or indict Cheney and Bush. Now, I've spent quite a bit of time in the U.S. Congress talking up impeachment, as long as a few other issues. And I get all these excuses. Oh, it's so late in their term. And, well, we have an election coming up, and if we do that, we won't get anything else done. To which I say, great. But you know, I believe that the Democratic leadership in the U.S. Congress has made a calculated political decision that because Cheney and Bush are so incredibly unpopular, if they can possibly keep them in office until November, the Democrats will sweep the election. And they may be right, but they may not, because they may just tick off their base so much with their inaction. In any event, I tell them there are more important things than partisan politics. I think that impeachment is a moral issue. It's also the one remedy given us by the Constitution to deal with an imperial presidency. But there are, in addition, 3 very practical reasons for proceeding with impeachment, no matter how late it gets. The first is impeachment proceedings, even if it never gets to the Senate for judgment, will make it much easier for the generals and admirals in the Pentagon to refuse an order to attack Iran. The second important practical reason for proceeding with impeachment is that we need to empty that box of goodies, the special powers that have been added to the presidency in violation of the Constitution, with Congress abdicating all its power to the executive branch. We need to get rid of those, and we need to send a message to future presidents that if they become a despot and trash the Constitution, that we will not let them just ride out their term and retire to a ranch in Paraguay. We will take them down. And the third practical reason for proceeding with impeachment is that it will send a message to the world that we, the American people, do not support the evil that has been done in our nation. Now, as important as these near-term objectives are, they are merely dealing with symptoms. And there is a much larger root problem, which is the domination of our government by a handful of billionaires and multinational corporations. And it's this bigger issue that I want to address tonight, because I think this is the issue which is endangering Canada. The United States and Canada share a common heritage of human rights devolving from British common law and the Magna Carta. In the U.S., these rights were formalized in our Constitution in 1789 and the Bill of Rights in 1791. In Canada, though your Constitution was not formalized by that name until 1982 and your Bill of Rights in 1960, the rights themselves have been recognized just about from the beginning. Both our countries, while always insisting on the rights of gentlemen of British descent, have until recently had horrible histories when it comes to granting those rights to the indigenous peoples of our land or to those of other races. The Cold War brought our countries together in fear of a Soviet attack. The natural result was NORAD, a common regional air defense system. Now, however, the phony war on terror is being used to further amalgamate our militaries and more. The U.S. Northern Command will have bases on Canadian territory. Canada, while officially not a part of the coalition of the willing in Iraq, is nonetheless playing important roles in that conflict. Canadian ships with 1,300 Canadian troops supported the original shock and awe attack. In 2004, a Canadian general was second in command of all forces in Iraq. In addition, Canada has provided war planners, ground troops on an exchange basis, weapons, logistics support with Canadian CC-130 transports, money, and diplomatic support. Canadian forces have also taken a lead role in Afghanistan, freeing up American troops for use in Iraq. Canadian soldiers are still being killed in Afghanistan. Just about every week or two I hear about another. Unless I succeed in my efforts in the United States, we may be dragging you into another disastrous conflict in Iran, and preventing that is my top priority. But it's not just into the wars of aggression that we have sucked our northern neighbor. We're also leading you down the primrose path toward a police state. In the U.S., it was the Patriot Act. Here, it's the Anti-Terrorism Act. At least your government gave it a more honest name. Finally, we are both enmeshed in the disastrous Security and Prosperity Partnership, or North American Union. This unification of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico will do much more than rob us of our sovereignty, our unique cultures, and our standard of living. If we let it, the North American Union will also eliminate the rights both of us enjoy through our constitutions and bills of rights. The North American Union is totally designed to maximize corporate profits through a thoroughly corporatist, which is just another word for fascist, government. I don't want that to happen to my country, nor yours. I love Canada, and I'm grateful to you for being a sanctuary for Americans who oppose our corporate wars on moral grounds. Thank you for your hospitality to our young dissenters. I was saddened to see that your new government has made a, perhaps tragic step in the wrong direction by, for the first time, sending one of our dissenting troops back to the U.S. for imprisonment. Now, with my remaining time, I want to give you a vision of an alternative future, I think a better future, by giving you an inaugural address as the new radical President of the United States. Perhaps one of you can write a similar speech for a new Prime Minister of Canada. Now, I don't have all the answers as to how to bring this about in either of our countries, but I do know that before we can do so, we have to have a clear vision of what it is we want. And for each of the problems I'm now going to solve as President of the United States, I see at least the potential for similar situations here in Canada. If we can take back our country, you can take back yours. After all, we have the same corporate adversaries. So I now ask you to pretend that I am speaking to you as President of the United States at my inauguration, first day in office. In the audience are all the members of Congress, government officials, and you, the people of the world. I, by the way, encourage you to clap and cheer like crazy when you hear something you agree with, and sit on your hands when you don't. That lets those watching on television know what it is they're supposed to believe. It's the Washington way. My sisters and brothers, we come together in a time of multiple crises. There's global warming, peak oil, falling wages and rising prices, a spiraling deficit, the healthcare shortfall, immigration, housing foreclosures, our deteriorating infrastructure, high school dropouts, astronomical incarceration rates, homeless veterans, rising suicide rates, the loss of our civil liberties, a growing alienation from our allies around the world, crushing debt, hungry children, inexcusable poverty, an exhausted military stressed by disastrous wars, and, unbelievably, persistent ignorance and apathy among our people. The good news is that there are solutions for all these problems and crises, solutions which have been worked out in considerable detail and have been available for some time. The only reason these solutions have not been implemented is that they reduce the profits of giant corporations who exercise control over our governments. You see, corporations over the last about 150 years in the U.S. have increasingly escaped government regulation and have accumulated political rights as if they were persons. This has included so-called First Amendment free speech rights to spend as much money as they want, buying up politicians, drafting legislation for their profit, and buying up voters and elections through their monopoly corporate media. It's reached the point where foreign policy, international trade, and military decisions are made for short-term corporate profit to the detriment of our people and our national security. Our government has become totally controlled by corporate interests, and this is the very definition of fascism. Our problems are not due to incompetence or inexperience or a government that's too big or too small. We have these problems because those in government no longer serve us. They serve their corporate masters and benefactors and have deliberately chosen policies which harm our nation and our people. Those of us who dedicate our lives to peace, economic justice, and environmental preservation can make little progress in our struggles so long as ultimate power is in the hands of those who profit from war, poverty, and pollution. But here comes the good news. Tonight, that power has come to an end. I didn't get here tonight by taking corporate millions. I didn't get here by selling myself to the oil companies, the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies. To be quite honest, I'm not sure how I got here. But here I am, and as long as I am President of the United States, this government will serve the needs of the people, not the greeds of the wealthy elite. Now, turning things around won't be easy. What our Constitution empowers me to change, I shall. And I'll do it fast. But for much of what needs doing, I'll need the cooperation of you in Congress, and I ask for it tonight. You see, this Constitution does not make me the decider. Only the proposer and the implementer. You, the people's representatives in Congress, are the deciders. I am therefore vacating all the over 1,100 signing statements imposed by my predecessor. I'm revoking Presidential Directives 20 and 51, which give me dictatorial powers. I ask for repeal of the misnamed Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, and all the martial law and special and dictatorial powers acts passed in the last 8 years. This is not a monarchy, and I have no interest in being a dictator. Oh, I'll be called one because of the sweeping changes I am instituting. You see, returning to the Constitution is not just a change, it's a revolution. The first American Revolution was when we broke free of the tyranny of King George III. The second was when the federal government became increasingly powerful and centralized and dominated by corporate interests, resulting in another tyranny, most recently under another George. Tonight represents the flowering of our third American Revolution, when we the people once again throw off the shackles of tyranny and take back our country and our Constitution. Restoring the Constitution means ending the imperial presidency and returning power to the people's representatives. But I warn you, members of Congress, if you continue to ignore your constitutional responsibility to serve your constituents and instead serve only yourselves and the big money interests you are indebted to, if you ignore the Constitution and attempt to protect the crooked, corporate-dominated status quo, I will go over your heads to the people and ask them to retire all of you, regardless of party. In order to restore some semblance of our republic, we must give the people real choices, not false ones, between the Republicrats and the Demopublicans. And we must have an informed electorate, not a brainwashed electorate. This means we need electoral reform and media reform. First, electoral reform. The constitutional principle of one person, one vote means that any means of voting which does not produce a paper ballot that can be counted, recounted, and audited as necessary is unconstitutional. I ask Congress and the states to return to paper ballots, institute full public financing of elections, proportional representation, preference voting, sometimes called instant runoff voting, abolition of burdensome petition requirements on independents and third parties, and so working people can actually vote, making Election Day a federal holiday. And many of these changes are designed to empower third parties. There is nothing democratic about a two-party system when both parties are owned at the highest level by the same wealthy interests. I also asked Congress to quickly pass a constitutional amendment restoring the original meaning of this document, and the amendment says corporations and other fictitious entities are not persons under this Constitution and have none of the rights and privileges thereof. Media reform. I am ordering the Federal Communications Commission to immediately reinstate the Fairness Doctrine and the ban on multiple ownership. It's time for a return to family-owned newspapers and radio and television stations. The monopoly media conglomerates must sell off their assets immediately. The public airways are once again going to belong to the people and serve the public interest. The key to ending fascism is to separate big money and political power, and we're taking immediate steps to do just that. Now, as you know, the previous administration was forced to resign after Bush and Cheney were arrested as war criminals. Bush and Cheney were arrested by Pentagon officers who refused to carry out illegal orders to attack Iran. They also faced court-martial proceedings for exploitation of the 9/11 tragedy to deceive our nation into unnecessary and illegal wars of aggression. For abuse of power as Commander-in-Chief, and for violating the Constitution and their oath of office. The evidence of their guilt is absolutely overwhelming. The Pentagon officers involved have been promoted or commended for following their oath of office, which is to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that includes a renegade president and vice president. Now, in reality, these officers really had no choice because the Nuremberg principles enshrined in our Uniform Code of Military Justice say that we in the military have not only the right, but the duty to refuse an illegal order. Remember, we executed Nazis for just following orders. If I or any member of my administration ever gives such an illegal order, I expect you to take similar action against us. Your duty to the Constitution far exceeds any perceived loyalty to any person. The real question about these events is why it fell to the military to take action. If you members of Congress had done your constitutional duty, these criminals would have been impeached long ago. It's a hackneyed expression, and you've heard it many times, but it's true. Clinton lied, no one died. If it was okay to impeach Bill Clinton for fibbing about an event which only embarrassed his family and soiled a blue dress, why did you refuse to impeach Cheney and Bush for deceiving us into a war costing so many thousands of lives? And listen up, my Republican friends. If it was right for Richard Nixon to have to resign under threat of impeachment for covering up an attempt to peek at the other party's plans, why was it not right for you to immediately get rid of those responsible, not just for the two deadly wars of aggression, but for the loss of habeas corpus and posse comitatus, spying on American citizens, torturing suspects in the phony war on terror, saddling our grandchildren with more trillions in debt, giving away our sovereignty with the North American Union, for goodness sakes, and trashing the Constitution itself. Where is the accountability? By the way, this Constitution says the President and Vice President shall be removed, not may be removed, upon impeachment and conviction of such offenses. All you members of Congress who impeded impeachment are yourselves in violation of your oath of office, and your constituents ought to remove you. There is also evidence of a massive cover-up with respect to 9/11 itself. The official 9/11 report, tightly controlled by the White House, amounts to little but a whitewash. When combined with the confiscation of videotapes, audio tapes, black boxes, and other evidence by the FBI, it is clear that regardless of who was responsible for 9/11, the subsequent cover-up was itself a conspiracy involving elements of the White House and the intelligence establishment. And again, you members of Congress who voted against a new investigation are accessories to that conspiracy. I know I've been somewhat hard on Congress, but I think deservedly so. But we have a chance for a new beginning. I expect to have a close working relationship with the new congressional leadership. The minority leader is a man I greatly admire and respect, Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. And the Speaker of the House is an old friend of mine and a great patriot, Congressman Dennis Kucinich. As you may remember, he got the job when Nancy Pelosi lost her seat to Congresswoman Cindy Sheehan. But back to 9/11. You see, we, the people, have still not been told who was really responsible for 9/11. Dedicated researchers have proven that it could not have happened the way the Bush administration said it did. I'm an old interceptor pilot, and hijacked airliners do not fly around for an hour and 40 minutes without being intercepted, unless our air defense system was sabotaged. Indestructible black boxes, and by the way, they're not really black, they're bright orange, but never mind. Indestructible black boxes do not evaporate in the same fire from which an unharmed passport floats to the street below. Steel skyscrapers do not collapse at free fall speed because of a kerosene fire. Steel skyscrapers do not collapse at all because of a kerosene fire. Never have and never will. And Building 7 wasn't even struck by an aircraft. Is there anybody out there who never heard about Building 7? The third tower that came down? We have a few. Okay. Maybe for their benefit, we ought to show that 3-minute video. Can we do that?
Building number 7 at the World Trade Center was a 47-story building with a steel frame. No airplane crashed into it, nor did the towers fall onto it. However, this building disintegrated on September 11th.
More on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know, but New York very much a city still in chaos. The phones are not working properly, the subway lines are not working.
July 24th, 2001. Larry A. Silverstein, who already owned World Trade Center 7, signs a $3.2 billion 99-year lease on the entire World Trade Center complex 6 weeks before 9/11. Included in the lease is a $3.5 billion insurance policy, specifically covering acts of terrorism.
PBS has a documentary called America Rebuilds, in which Larry Silverstein, the landlord of Building 7, explains what happened.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Sorry to interrupt for that, but I thought it was important to bring everybody up to speed on Building 7 because the media don't mention it, the mainstream media, and the 9/11 Commission official report never mentioned Building 7. Now, the truth about 9/11 is that after 7 years, we still don't know the truth about 9/11, and we should, and so should the families of victims. I am therefore appointing a commission to conduct a new and truly independent investigation of 9/11. This investigation will be co-chaired by David Ray Griffin and Richard Gage, and coordinated by my Vice President, Cynthia McKinney. Never again must we allow this nation to be stampeded into war under false pretenses. Now, 9/11 is not the only truth we are concerned about. There have been other cover-ups, including the murders of a number of our soldiers in the field, most of them women. If the Pentagon won't do a proper investigation, we'll do it for them. Parents have a right to know what really happened to soldiers like Pat Tillman and Lavina Johnson. A government that honors the truth must uncover the truth and then tell the truth. I know, I guess a lot of you may not have heard of Lavina Johnson. You've probably heard of Pat Tillman, the football player. But Lavina Johnson was a young 18-year-old very devout Christian black girl, and quiet, soft-spoken. Her body was discovered, and the Army ruled it a suicide. She had been shot in the head, but she had also been beaten severely over her entire body, and acid had been poured on her genitals, probably to destroy DNA evidence. I don't know about you, but if I was going to commit suicide, I would not beat myself to a pulp first and pour acid on my genitals before shooting myself. This is one of many such cover-ups which must be explored and the truth must be revealed. Now, we have at times, including I think the last few years, had a government with bad policies. But we're a good people. What we have long needed is a government which reflects the values and the goodness of our people. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which cooperates with big business to export our jobs and import cheap illegal labor, driving down wages for all our workers. You know, they don't want you to know this, but in spite of soaring productivity, real wages in the United States today is a third of what it was in the 1950s. A third. If worker pay had kept up with executive pay, the typical worker would be making $1.2 million a year, and the minimum wage would be $217 an hour. Now, I'm not promising that, but we are taking immediate steps to benefit workers. I asked Congress to pass legislation indexing the minimum wage for inflation, placing tariffs on importation of goods manufactured by corporations who move jobs out of the country, and limiting the corporate income tax deduction for executive compensation to 20 times the salary of their lowest paid worker. See, the ratio between CEO pay and worker pay used to be 20 to 1. Now it's over 600 to 1. We got a free country. Corporations can pay their executives whatever they wish, but we don't have to give them a tax deduction for it. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which helps corporations despoil God's creation for profit. True conservatism demands that we preserve the land, the air, and the water for our grandchildren and their grandchildren for generations. And fiscal responsibility demands that polluters clean up their messes, not taxpayers. We will initiate bold programs in solar and wind energy with subsidies and tax breaks to make them not only competitive but superior in the marketplace. At the same time, the Department of Energy will impose a ban on the construction of new fossil fuel and nuclear power. I'm requesting new CAFE standards doubling the gas mileage of cars and light trucks, and that's just for starters. This will be coordinated by my Secretary of Transportation, Ralph Nader. There is no industrial free lunch, and there should be no corporate welfare. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which violates international law in its conflicts and denies its own citizens their constitutional rights. I have therefore ordered the release of all those being detained without charge, the closure of the prison at Guantanamo Bay. We'll find somewhere else for Bush and Cheney. And the end of the extraordinary rendition program in which suspects are kidnapped and taken to secret foreign prisons to be tortured. I've pardoned a host of political prisoners, including Leonard Peltier, Munir Abu-Jamal, and Border Patrol agents Campion and Ramos. I'm also pardoning all those incarcerated for possession or use of marijuana. And am directing the Secretary of Agriculture to support the production of industrial hemp. Those addicted to heroin and cocaine should be in treatment, not in jail. The failed war on drugs is over. All contracts for mercenaries, including all contracts with Blackwater, are immediately canceled. This includes contracts with the DOD, the CIA, the State Department, and the Department of Homeland Security, which, by the way, is being abolished. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which launches unnecessary wars of aggression. Consequently, I have asked the United Nations to send peacekeepers to Iraq to do a job that we simply can't do as an occupying army. But whether or not they comply, within 3 months, we are going to support what's left of our troops by bringing them home while they're still alive. I've also ordered a halt to the use of depleted uranium weapons. They will be destroyed and stored as the dangerous radioactive waste they really are. Our values and goodness are not reflected by creating thousands of disabled veterans at wars of aggression and then refusing to take proper care of them. The signature wound of the Iraq War has been brain trauma, and yet the Bush administration slashed the budget for the Brain Trauma Center by 50%. The cost of caring for the disabled veterans from the Iraq War alone will be in the trillions of dollars, and yet it is a cost we must bear. The care of our soldiers injured in action, racked with PTSD and poisoned by depleted uranium, is not a discretionary expenditure to be avoided by delay, denial, and bureaucratic red tape. It is a solemn obligation of this government, and it will be met. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which poisons 3 million Vietnamese with Agent Orange and 2 million Iraqis with depleted uranium and then walks away. We're going to provide medical care for these victims. It's time we took responsibility, partially at least, for our actions. Similarly, we will take care of the World Trade Center first responders and rescue workers suffering from respiratory illnesses because the previous administration told them the air was safe to breathe when they knew it was not. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which promotes a globalization which depresses living standards at home and allows corporations to destroy the quality of life in banana republics and client states all over the world. NAFTA has not only cost us millions of manufacturing jobs, it has allowed Archer Daniels Midland to undercut the price of corn in Mexico, driving millions of Mexican family farmers off the land and across our border as illegal immigrants. In addition, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank have caused untold suffering around the world. If we can't reform them, we will abolish. With respect to our relations with the government of Mexico, I have ordered the cancellation of the Security and Prosperity Partnership, or North American Union. Termination of the NAFTA superhighway, which would have cut both the United States and Canada in half, put all our longshoremen and truckers out of work. And I've ordered the suspension of NAFTA completely until Mexico gives its workers union rights, protections for health, safety, and the environment, and wages at least comparable to our minimum wage. If Canada wants to unite with a third world Mexico with the enormous disparity in standards of living there, they can do it without us. My guess, however, is that the people of Canada don't want the North American Union any more than we do. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a system in which all our personal income taxes go to pay interest on a staggering national debt created out of thin air. The Constitution authorizes Congress to coin our money, not a private cartel. I asked Congress to eliminate the debt-based monetary system and pass legislation abolishing the Federal Reserve. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which uses our money to train death squads in the techniques of torture, intimidation, and assassination. The School of the Americas, by whatever name they choose to call it, is closed. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which gives most favored nation status to the butchers of Tiananmen Square and places an illegal secondary embargo on the impoverished people of Cuba. The embargo of Cuba just ended. Now, I recognize that we need advance information on Al-Qaeda and those who wish to do us harm. But our values and goodness are not reflected by, and our security is not enhanced by, an organization that promotes instability, insurrection, tyranny, torture, terrorism, murder, and war around the world in our name and with our money. John F. Kennedy and Jimmy Carter attempted to reform the CIA so it would stick to gathering intelligence. They failed. I'm not going to try. As of this moment, I am abolishing the CIA. Many outstanding analysts in the CIA will be transferred to other agencies, including the Defense Intelligence Agency. This will be coordinated by my Director of Intelligence, Ray McGovern. He will see also that the activities of the National Security Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office follow the law and respect the constitutional rights of our citizens. The days of warrantless wiretaps and using librarians as snitches is over. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which sends its working class youth around the world to kill the sons and daughters of working people in other countries. Our values and goodness are not reflected by sending our children to the Middle East to kill Arabs so the oil companies can profit from selling the oil under other people's sand, making us the target of terrorists. No more Iraqs, no more Kosovos, no more El Salvadors. These are not isolated incidents of stupidity. They're part of a long, bloody history of foreign policy being conducted for the financial benefit of the wealthy few. It is a new form of colonialism. It violates our Constitution. It endangers our national security. It mortgages our future. It sacrifices our children. And it will never happen again. As president, I will use the men and women in our armed forces to protect our borders and our people, not the financial interests of Bechtel, Folgers, Chiquita Banana, Exxon, and Halliburton. This one change in military mission, eliminating the mission of protecting the global financial interests of multinational corporations, will allow us to have greater security and simultaneously reduce our defense budget by 80%. I've ordered the new Secretary of Defense, Admiral William Fallon, to begin an immediate recall of our forces around the world. Think of it, after 63 years, the occupation of Germany and Japan has finally come to an end. With the exception of small Marine detachments guarding our embassies, all our military will be home within 3 months, and all overseas bases return to the host country. Now, needless to say, there will be no nuclear attack on Iran. My special envoy to the Middle East, Jimmy Carter, will be meeting with them to solve our differences. And once he is finished there, he will straighten out the Israelis and the Palestinians. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which for decades has been in violation of its treaty responsibilities to disarmament. I have ordered a halt to the design, testing, and production of nuclear weapons, and have directed the Secretary of State, Senator Mike Gravel, to open negotiations toward the rapid and total abolition of nuclear weapons. Finally, I'd like to speak directly to you, the people. I'm unlikely to last long in this job, partly because I have terminal cancer from Agent Orange, and partly because there are powerful interests like insurance companies, oil companies, and bankers with hundreds of billions of reasons for wanting me assassinated. Oh, by the way, if you hear that I have suddenly committed suicide by shooting myself in the back with a shotgun, a long one, 3 times, you might want to be just a little suspicious. You know, they'll call you a conspiracy theorist, but be suspicious anyway. But you know, it won't matter. They can kill me, but they can't kill what we started. It's too late for that. My words heard tonight by a few will tomorrow reach many. If the mainstream media won't carry it, YouTube will. My faith is that you, the people, will not let the vision die with you. I'm unlikely to get there with you, but like Brother Martin, I have been to the mountaintop, and I have seen the promised land. What I have seen is a country in which every person, regardless of their race, creed, color, age, or sexual orientation, is valued and lives in dignity. Every person is cared for, and every person is free to reach his or her full potential. It's a country in which every family can be supported by one wage earner with one job, paying a living wage. It's a country, perhaps like Canada or France or so many others, in which health care is provided to all as a right through a single-payer national health program. You know, as a conservative, I believe that the only fiscally responsible way to provide universal health care is to eliminate the profit, the overhead, the red tape, the interference between doctor and patient of the insurance companies by kicking them out of health care altogether. I've seen a country in which educators and teachers are highly valued and financially compensated accordingly. It's a country in which policemen, nurses, poets, firefighters, teachers, and garbage collectors can afford a nice house in a good neighborhood and live in comfort. Not just scientists, brain surgeons, CEOs, rock stars, lawyers, and basketball players. It's a country in which faith is respected, culture is preserved, the arts are supported, and the Constitution is actually followed. It's a country that seeks not to be king of the hill, nor subservient to the World Trade Organization, but seeks rather to be a sovereign, responsible member of the family of nations. Nothing more and nothing less. A country that is free of the threat of terrorism because it is no longer feared and hated, because it no longer does hateful things to people all around the world. It's a country that leads the world, not just with military might, but with its vision, its compassion, its democracy, its productivity, its freedom, its standard of living, its care for the global environment, its treatment of its own people, and its goodness. Above all, it's a country at peace with the world and with its own people. That's the kind of country I have seen, the country our people deserve, and the country you can build. We will preserve our nation and our Constitution. But I can't do it alone. Each of you must do your part. Spread the word. Keep the vision alive. Drop your own pebbles in the pond and make some waves. If you don't see somebody worth voting for, run for office yourself. Never settle for anything less than a government that follows the Constitution, honors the truth, and serves the people. Now, it matters not if my presidency is real or fanciful. My part is done. It is finished. The rest is in your hands. The future, the vision, and the dream itself depend on you. May God bless you in your struggles and bless our nation through your efforts. We the people can win. We the people must win. We the people will win. Thank you and good night.